Imagine sitting beside a small fire 40,000 years ago. Beyond the flames lies complete darkness. Then suddenly, the forest stops breathing, the insects vanish, the animals go quiet, even the wind disappears. Ancient people knew what that silence could mean: predators, disaster, spirits, or death moving unseen through the night. And for most of human history, silence was never peaceful. It was a warning. Before we continue, like the video and subscribe for more ancient mysteries, lost worlds and forgotten human stories. The silence arrives first, not the peaceful kind that settles gently over a sleeping field, but the sudden absence of everything familiar. A few moments earlier, insects scrape their endless rhythm through the grass. Distant animals shift somewhere beyond the trees, and wind drifts softly through branches blackened by night. Then, without warning, the sounds stop entirely. The darkness remains unchanged, yet every human body around the fire instantly stiffens. Eyes lift toward the unseen forest. Hands tighten around sharpened wood and stone. Nobody needs to explain what this silence means. Something is out there. For most of human history, people do not fear silence because it is empty. They fear it because it is full of hidden intention. Long before cities, before temples, before writing or metal or walls, human beings survive by listening. Sound is not decoration in the ancient world. It is information. The cracking of branches, the movement of wings, the calls of birds before dawn, the distant howling of predators, even the endless pulse of insects at night all create a map of reality. Life announces itself constantly. A living landscape is noisy. When that noise disappears, the human mind immediately understands that balance has been broken. Tens of thousands of years ago, small groups of hunter-gatherers sleep in temporary camps beside rivers, under rocky cliffs, or at the edges of forests where firelight can hold back at least part of the darkness. The night beyond the flames remains unknowable. Human eyesight is poorly adapted for deep darkness compared to many predators. Ancient people know this intimately. Lions, hyenas, wolves, leopards, bears, and countless smaller hunters move through the night with confidence humans can never fully possess. What keeps early people alive is not strength alone, but vigilance, memory, and cooperation. Most importantly, listening. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that prehistoric humans organized sleep carefully. Camps rarely collapse entirely into unconsciousness. Somebody remains awake. Fires are maintained. Infants stay near mothers. Older individuals often sleep lightly. Even among modern hunter-gatherer groups studied in recent centuries, researchers notice that complete silence inside a camp almost never happens. Coughing, movement, murmured speech, and the shifting of embers continue through the night. Human beings evolve socially, and part of that survival depends on the constant reassurance that others remain nearby. But outside the camp is another matter entirely. The prehistoric night is unimaginably dark by modern standards. No electric glow hangs above the horizon. No roads carry distant headlights. Clouds can erase moonlight completely. Dense forests become walls of blackness where depth and distance disappear. A predator may stand only meters away without being seen. Ancient humans understand quickly that hearing often detects danger long before sight. This reality shapes the nervous system itself. Modern neuroscience suggests that the human brain constantly monitors environmental sound even during sleep. Certain patterns become associated with safety, continuous natural noise signals stability, Sudden interruption signals possible threat. Scholars still debate how deeply these instincts are inherited versus learned, but evidence from psychology, anthropology, and evolutionary biology points in the same direction. Silence activates vigilance. The ancient world trains this instinct relentlessly. A camp near Ice Age grasslands hears mammoths shifting in distant darkness. Reindeer migrate across frozen valleys. Wind pushes through dry vegetation. Wolves communicate across enormous distances with eerie precision. Yet there are moments when every animal abruptly stops. Birds vanish into stillness. Insects cease their rhythm. Even wind can seem to retreat. Modern people sometimes experience this sensation before severe storms or while walking alone through forests at night. But ancient humans encounter it constantly, and often with fatal consequences, because predators alter landscapes without making noise themselves. A stalking cat moves almost silently. So does a human raiding party. The forest does not become quiet by accident. It becomes quiet because every living thing nearby recognizes danger before people do. That understanding settles deeply into human memory long before written history begins. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Some of the oldest surviving myths on Earth carry traces of this ancient fear. Cultures separated by oceans and thousands of years still describe nighttime silence as unnatural, sacred, or deadly. Spirits emerge when forests become still. Demons wait beyond the firelight. Ghosts arrive without footsteps. Gods communicate through sudden absence rather than sound. These beliefs do not appear from nowhere. They grow from the physical realities of survival. The evidence remains incomplete, of course. No written records survive from most of prehistoric humanity. Archaeologists reconstruct ancient emotions carefully through campsites, burial patterns, environmental evidence, and comparison with surviving oral traditions. Yet certain patterns repeat so consistently that they reveal something profound about human experience. Ancient people across vastly different regions associate sound with life and silence with uncertainty. Even caves reflect this tension. Many prehistoric cave systems contain signs of ritual activity far beyond ordinary habitation zones. Individuals carry torches deep underground, into chambers where natural light never reaches. The deeper passages often produce overwhelming silence, interrupted only by dripping water or distant echoes. Researchers studying Paleolithic cave art sometimes note how psychologically disorienting these environments become. The darkness is total. Orientation fails easily. Sound behaves strangely. A single breath or movement expands unnaturally across stone chambers. For ancient visitors, these places likely feel alive in unsettling ways. Some scholars argue that altered mental states connected to darkness and silence may partially explain why caves become associated with spirits, ancestors, or other worlds. No single explanation fully accounts for this behavior, but the emotional power of such environments is difficult to ignore. Even modern explorers with the electric lights often describe intense unease in deep, silent spaces underground. The same reaction follows people across deserts, frozen tundra, mountains, and open oceans. Human beings adapt to many landscapes, yet silence continues to produce anxiety because it removes predictability. A noisy environment can be understood. Silence hides intention, and the ancient world contains endless hidden intentions. There are nights when entire camps vanish without obvious evidence. Predators drag bodies into darkness. Snowstorms erase tracks by morning. Floodwaters swallow sleeping settlements. Rival groups attack before dawn. Sometimes survivors hear nothing at all until it is too late. Archaeological sites occasionally reveal sudden abandonment, scattered remains, broken tools, signs of violence, or evidence of panic frozen in time. More often, however, the record says very little. Human lives disappear quietly. That quiet becomes its own kind of terror. As human societies grow larger and more complex, they carry these instincts forward instead of leaving them behind. Farmers listening to dark fields still fear what silence means. Sailors crossing black oceans distrust nights when wind suddenly dies. Desert travelers dread empty stillness across dunes where sound no longer carries properly. Even in the first cities, people fill darkness with music, guards, ritual chants, bells, prayers, dogs, and movement. Civilization itself becomes, in part, an attempt to overpower silence. Because deep beneath language and culture remains an older memory. A memory carried from fires at the edge of forests where human beings stare into darkness and realize that the world outside their fragile circle of light is watching them back. The forest does not need to attack people directly to terrify them. Often, it only needs to become still. Ancient forests are rarely silent places. During daylight, they pulse with overlapping layers of sound so dense that no single creature fully controls the landscape. Birds argue endlessly above the canopy. Insects vibrate through leaves and bark. Small mammals rustle beneath undergrowth. Branches creak. Water moves somewhere nearby even when unseen. At night, the sounds change rather than disappear. Owls replace daytime birds. Predators move carefully through brush. Nocturnal animals begin feeding. Wind shifts differently through towering trees. The darkness carries its own living rhythm. For prehistoric people, this rhythm becomes familiar enough to read almost unconsciously. Hunter-gatherers entering forests thousands of years ago do not move through wilderness blindly. What survives in the ethnographic record suggests that many indigenous societies possess astonishing awareness of environmental sound. Experienced trackers distinguish movement by species, size, direction, and even emotional state. They identify danger through tiny disruptions most modern people would never notice. A frightened bird, for example, may reveal a predator hidden far away. Sudden movement among monkeys high in the canopy may warn of a leopard below. Herd animals fleeing in silence can signal human hunters approaching. But there is another signal more disturbing than all the others. Nothing. The silence ancient people fear most is rarely complete in a literal sense. Instead, it is a collapse of expected sound, a missing pattern, the sudden withdrawal of ordinary life. Modern survival instructors sometimes describe forests falling silent before large predators appear, and wildlife biologists confirm that many animals alter behavior rapidly when danger enters an area. Birds stop calling, smaller creatures freeze or hide, entire ecosystems briefly hold their breath. Early humans learn this lesson repeatedly, often through loss. Imagine a small group moving through dense woodland at dusk, perhaps 40,000 years ago. They carry sharpened spears tipped with stone points carefully shaped over many hours. Their knowledge of the landscape may extend across generations. They know where streams flood during seasonal rains, where edible plants grow, where deer travel, where predators den. Yet no amount of familiarity fully removes danger. Forests are layered worlds. Visibility collapses quickly between trunks and heavy brush. Sound reaches listeners unevenly. Distance becomes difficult to judge. Then the insects stop. One person notices first. Another turns slowly. The silence spreads through the group almost physically. Nobody speaks because speaking itself feels dangerous. Somewhere ahead, hidden completely from view, something larger is moving. This reaction is not superstition, it is survival. Scholars studying human evolution often point out that prehistoric people exist lower on the food chain than modern humans prefer to imagine. Today, humanity dominates nearly every ecosystem on Earth. But for most of prehistory, humans are vulnerable omnivores sharing landscapes with faster, stronger predators. In Ice Age Europe, cave lions outweigh modern African lions. Hyenas hunt in coordinated packs capable of crushing bone effortlessly. Saber-toothed cats stalk ambush points. Giant bears occupy caves humans also seek for shelter. In tropical regions, enormous snakes, crocodiles, and big cats thrive in darkness where humans struggle to see. The forest teaches caution because caution keeps communities alive. Archaeological evidence from prehistoric skeletons occasionally preserves signs of violent encounters with animals. Bite marks appear on bones, skulls show crushing injuries, some remains suggest scavenging after death. Yet physical evidence tells only part of the story. The greater influence may be psychological. Ancient people do not need constant attacks to fear silence. A few catastrophic encounters across generations are enough to transform behavior permanently. Children absorb these lessons early. Among many traditional societies documented in recent centuries, nighttime rules surrounding forests remain extremely strict. Children are warned never to wander after dark. Certain areas become forbidden entirely during night hours. Fires are maintained carefully. Stories about spirits or monsters often concentrate around isolated woods, ravines, or places where sound behaves strangely. Modern listeners sometimes dismiss such stories as primitive imagination, but many contain practical survival logic hidden beneath supernatural language. Do not follow strange noises into darkness. Do not travel alone after sunset. Do not ignore sudden silence. Over thousands of years, these warnings become embedded inside culture itself. The evidence remains incomplete regarding exactly how Paleolithic people emotionally interpreted forests. Yet cave art and ritual behavior suggest that animals occupy an immense symbolic role in human consciousness. Some caves contain overwhelming numbers of painted predators, lions, bears, mammoths, bison, and hybrid human-animal figures emerge from walls deep underground. Scholars still debate whether these images represent hunting magic, spiritual beliefs, storytelling, or something else entirely. No single explanation fully accounts for the complexity of the art. What seems clear, however, is that prehistoric people do not see themselves as separate from nature in the modern sense. They exist inside living systems they cannot fully control. Forest silence, therefore, carries enormous emotional weight because it signals disruption within that system. Even today, people alone in forests often report irrational feelings that somebody is watching them. Psychologists sometimes connect this sensation to hyperactive pattern recognition shaped by evolution. Human brains are designed to detect possible threats quickly, even at the cost of false alarms. It is safer, evolutionarily speaking, to mistake shadows for predators than predators for shadows. In ancient forests, this mental tendency becomes heightened continuously. Darkness amplifies uncertainty. Sound echoes unpredictably between trees. Wind imitates movement. Branches snap without visible cause. Moonlight creates shifting shapes across uneven ground. Sleep deprivation, hunger, cold, and stress intensify perception further. A hunter isolated from companions at night may experience overwhelming dread long before any actual danger appears. And sometimes the danger never reveals itself. That may be the most disturbing part. Ancient people often hear silence without discovering its source. Something moves nearby, hidden perfectly within darkness, and leaves without confrontation. The mind fills these gaps naturally. Over time, entire landscapes gain reputations for unease. Certain valleys feel wrong after sunset. Certain groves become avoided. Hunters disappear near particular ridges or rivers. Fear accumulates geographically. In some regions, this fear may even influence settlement patterns. Archaeologists occasionally identify areas rich in resources that nevertheless show surprisingly limited habitation. Environmental explanations often account for this, but oral traditions preserved among later cultures sometimes describe these locations as spiritually dangerous or inhabited by hostile forces. Scholars remain cautious about drawing direct conclusions. Yet the persistence of such beliefs across continents is striking. The forest becomes more than terrain. It becomes a presence. As human beings begin mastering fire more effectively, they gain one of the few reliable tools capable of pushing back against this ancient fear. Flames provide warmth, visibility, and protection from many predators. Camps organized around fire create social stability in darkness. Storytelling itself likely flourishes in these illuminated circles while the unknown world waits beyond the light. But fire never fully conquers the silence between the trees, because every ancient person understands a simple reality that modern civilization often allows people to forget. The forest listens too. The first fires do not make human beings fearless. They only make the darkness visible. For hundreds of thousands of years, fire transforms the human relationship with night more profoundly than almost any other discovery. Long before agriculture, cities, or written language, controlled flame changes where people sleep, how they eat, how they gather socially, and perhaps even how they think. Archaeological evidence from sites in Africa, the Middle East, Asia, and Europe suggests that humans and earlier hominin relatives begin using fire regularly deep in prehistory. Though scholars still debate exactly when mastery becomes reliable and widespread, what survives in the record suggests a gradual process rather than a single moment of invention. Early fires may begin opportunistically from lightning strikes or natural wildfires before people learn to maintain embers and eventually create flame intentionally. At first, fire is fragile. It demands constant attention. A neglected fire dies quickly, especially in cold, wet, or windy environments. Entire groups may depend on a few carefully protected embers carried from place to place. This dependence changes the emotional structure of nighttime itself. Before reliable fire, darkness belongs almost entirely to predators. Human beings possess intelligence and endurance, but their senses remain poorly suited to complete night. Fire alters that balance slightly. A burning camp emits light, heat, smoke, and movement that many animals instinctively avoid. Hyenas circle farther away. Insects retreat from thick smoke. Some predators hesitate at the edge of illumination rather than entering openly. But the protection remains incomplete. A Paleolithic fire rarely lights more than a small circle against immense darkness. Beyond that circle, the ancient world remains hidden. The contrast itself may intensify fear. Fire does not erase the unknown, it frames it. Imagine an Ice Age camp beside a river sometime during the Upper Paleolithic. Wind moves across frozen grasslands under a moon barely visible through cloud. A cluster of people sits around low flames fed carefully with gathered wood and bone. Sparks rise briefly into blackness and vanish. Faces glow orange, then disappear again as fire shifts. Children sleep close to adults wrapped in animal hides. Spears rest nearby. Somebody remains awake to feed the fire because allowing it to die during winter could become fatal before morning. Outside the light, nothing can be seen clearly, and yet everyone knows the darkness is occupied. Modern experiments conducted in wilderness environments reveal how dramatically fire changes human perception. People consistently feel safer beside flames even when objective danger remains nearby. Fire creates psychological territory. It produces a visible boundary between order and uncertainty. Anthropologists studying traditional societies often observe how social interaction concentrates around nighttime fires. Stories emerge there. Rituals develop there. Knowledge passes between generations there. The fire becomes the center of human space itself. But its limits are equally important. Ancient people understand that darkness beyond the flames cannot be trusted. The edge of the light becomes psychologically charged territory. Many predators learn to observe humans from this distance. Wolves may linger just outside visibility. Big cats crouch silently beyond brush. Rival human groups can approach low to the ground, concealed by darkness until dangerously close. Sometimes the only warning is silence. The fire crackles. People murmur softly. Wind moves through grass. Then suddenly even the night insects stop. The darkness beyond the flames feels heavier than before, as though the unseen world itself has paused. Across many cultures, myths eventually emerge about entities waiting beyond firelight. Spirits linger at the borders of camps. Demons watch from forests. Ancestors return through darkness. While these beliefs vary enormously, the emotional pattern remains remarkably consistent. Human beings repeatedly imagine danger gathering at the edge of visibility. The evidence remains incomplete regarding the origins of many such traditions, but evolutionary psychology offers one possible explanation. Human minds are highly sensitive to boundaries and partially hidden information. A predator fully seen can be understood. A predator entirely absent causes less stress. The greatest anxiety often comes from incomplete detection, the suspicion of presence without confirmation. Fire intensifies this effect because it reveals only fragments of reality. Cave sites from prehistoric Europe preserve hints of how deeply early humans associate flame, darkness, and emotion. In some chambers, archaeologists discover evidence of repeated torch use deep underground far beyond practical living areas. Charcoal traces, soot patterns, and carefully placed hearths suggest deliberate movement through dangerous dark spaces. These journeys likely require enormous courage. Deep caves are unstable, disorienting, and deadly without reliable light. Yet people return repeatedly. Some researchers believe firelight itself contributes to altered psychological states inside caves. Flickering illumination makes painted animals appear to move across stone walls. Shadows distort shapes continuously. Sound echoes unpredictably. Silence between noises becomes oppressive. Under such conditions, ancient people may experience caves not merely as locations, but as thresholds into other realities. No single explanation fully accounts for why humans risk these journeys so consistently across millennia. Ritual, spirituality, social identity, and storytelling likely overlap. Still, darkness remains central to the experience. And darkness is never truly empty. As human migration expands into colder regions, fire becomes even more essential. During Ice Age winters, silence around camps may signal not only predators, but deadly weather itself. Snow absorbs sound unnaturally. Blizzards arrive with eerie calm beforehand. Frozen forests can become so still that even breathing seems intrusive. Ancient people traveling through these environments learn to associate silence with exposure, isolation, and death. In Arctic regions documented among later indigenous cultures, prolonged silence during winter darkness often acquires spiritual significance. Scholars remain careful not to generalize across societies, but many northern traditions treat certain quiet places or weather conditions with deep caution. What survives in oral histories suggests that silence is not simply absence, it is presence without explanation. Meanwhile, fire becomes humanity's fragile rebellion against that presence. The development of larger communal hearths may also reshape social bonds. Some anthropologists argue that nighttime gatherings around controlled flame encourage longer conversations, cooperative storytelling, and more complex planning. Fire extends waking hours beyond daylight. It creates time for memory, teaching, and imagination. In a sense, civilization begins in circles of light surrounded by threatening dark. Yet those circles always remain temporary. Wood runs out, rain extinguishes flames, winds scatter embers. Travellers crossing unfamiliar terrain cannot always maintain reliable fires. Even large settled communities later in history continue fearing nighttime silence despite improved technology. Torches illuminate streets poorly. Ancient cities after dark are dangerous places filled with thieves, stray animals, disease, and uncertainty. Human beings adapt to fire, but they never fully adapt to what waits beyond it. That ancient tension survives even now. Modern campers sitting beside flames often feel instinctively reluctant to stare too long into surrounding darkness. People describe sensations of being observed despite knowing they are probably alone. Crackling fire creates comfort, but it also sharpens awareness of whatever remains unseen. A small island of light surrounded by endless night. The oldest human sanctuary, and perhaps the oldest human illusion. The ancient world belongs to hunters after dark. Human beings eventually become the dominant species on Earth, but for most of prehistory that dominance remains uncertain and highly local. In daylight, coordinated groups armed with tools, intelligence, and endurance can defend themselves effectively against many threats. At night, however, the balance shifts. Darkness favors creatures shaped by millions of years of nocturnal adaptation. Eyes widen, hearing sharpens, movement becomes nearly silent. Human beings, gathered nervously around fragile fires, understand this instinctively. The fear of silence grows directly from this imbalance. Across Ice Age Europe, enormous predators move through landscapes humans also depend upon for survival. Cave lions patrol grasslands beneath moonlight. Unlike modern lions, they may hunt more frequently in colder environments where prey migrates unpredictably. Spotted hyenas roam in powerful clans capable of stripping carcasses to bone within minutes. Wolves track herds over immense distances with relentless patience. Massive brown bears occupy caves during hibernation seasons, sometimes forcing humans to abandon shelters suddenly. Further south, forests and wetlands conceal leopards, crocodiles, and giant snakes. In Asia, tigers evolve into masters of ambush, able to approach prey with astonishing stealth. In the Americas before the end of the Pleistocene, human populations encounter short-faced bears, saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, and other predators now extinct. These animals do not simply coexist beside ancient people, they compete with them. Archaeological sites occasionally reveal evidence of this competition in unsettling detail. At some cave locations in Europe, researchers discover alternating layers of human and carnivore occupation. Humans use caves temporarily, then predators reclaim them, then humans return again later. Bones from prey species mixed together with tooth marks and stone tool cuts, creating records of shared territory between hunters who fear each other. Sometimes humans are clearly the hunted. One prehistoric skull discovered in Europe preserves puncture wounds likely caused by a large cat. Other remains show gnaw marks suggesting scavenging by carnivores after death. The evidence is fragmentary, but enough survives to remind modern observers that ancient humans exist inside dangerous ecosystems rather than above them. And predators rarely announce themselves loudly. This becomes one of the great lessons shaping prehistoric fear. The most dangerous animals are often the quietest. Wolves howl, but not usually during attack. Big cats stalk almost silently. Crocodiles move beneath water without visible disturbance. Even large bears can approach with shocking stealth in dense terrain. Ancient people learn that noise is not always the warning. Sometimes silence itself is the warning. Modern wildlife researchers continue observing similar patterns today. Forests often grow quieter when apex predators move nearby. Birds stop calling. Smaller animals freeze or flee. Entire landscapes alter behavior subtly around hidden danger. Early humans living constantly within these systems would almost certainly recognize such changes long before understanding them scientifically. The nervous system adapts accordingly. Sleep becomes especially vulnerable. A sleeping human cannot run quickly, fight effectively, or maintain awareness of surroundings. This reality shapes ancient camp organization in profound ways. Ethnographic studies of traditional hunter-gatherer societies suggest that nighttime vigilance is deeply communal. Fires are positioned strategically. Camps often avoid dense vegetation where predators can approach unseen. People sleep in clusters. Dogs, once domesticated, become invaluable partly because their hearing and alertness extend human perception into darkness. Before dogs, however, people rely largely on each other. And on sound, the crack of branches, the movement of grass, sudden silence among insects, a single frightened bird exploding upward into darkness. These become life-saving signals. Ancient people likely interpret nighttime environments with extraordinary acoustic sensitivity compared to most modern humans. But predators learn too. Some species begin adapting directly to human behavior. Wolves shadow camp searching for scraps. Hyenas scavenge aggressively near fires. Big cats observe human movement patterns around water sources. Scholars still debate how early this behavioral arms race begins, but evidence suggests that humans and predators influence each other evolutionarily across immense spans of time. Fear sharpens both sides. One especially unsettling aspect of nocturnal predators is their invisibility. Humans may hear breathing without seeing the source. Eyeshine appears briefly at the edge of firelight and vanishes again. Footsteps stop suddenly. Something circles beyond visibility for hours without attacking openly. The psychological effect of being watched by unseen creatures likely leaves deep marks on human imagination. Many later myths preserve echoes of this experience. Night demons with glowing eyes, creatures lurking outside villages, shape-shifting predators moving silently through forests, beings that paralyze travelers with fear before attack. Such stories emerge independently across cultures separated by oceans and millennia. While supernatural explanations vary enormously, the emotional structure often remains similar. Darkness conceals intelligent danger. The evidence remains incomplete, of course. mythology cannot be reduced entirely to predator encounters. Religion, social control, symbolism, and storytelling all contribute. Yet the overlap between ancient fears and real nocturnal threats is difficult to ignore. Some predators may even influence ritual behavior directly. In parts of prehistoric Europe and Siberia, bear remains appear arranged deliberately in cave contexts that some researchers interpret as ritual treatment. Scholars debate these interpretations intensely. Natural processes can sometimes mimic intentional placement. Still, bears clearly occupy powerful symbolic roles in many northern cultures later in history. The same applies to wolves, lions, snakes, and other dangerous animals across continents. Creatures feared at night often become spiritually significant. This transformation makes psychological sense. Humans tend to mythologize forces they cannot fully control. Predators capable of killing silently in darkness acquire meanings beyond biology. They become symbols of death, wilderness, divine punishment, or supernatural power. And silence remains their companion. Perhaps nowhere is this more terrifying than in dense forests where visibility collapses almost completely after sunset. A person separated from camp may hear movement nearby for hours without determining direction or distance. Predators exploit confusion naturally. Tigers, for example, are known to circle prey silently before attack. Leopards drag victims into trees with shocking speed. Packs of wolves coordinate through minimal sound. Ancient people know these realities not through documentaries or scientific reports, but through direct experience. Someone disappears returning from water after dusk. A child wanders too far from camp. Hunters discover tracks circling sleeping areas by morning. A scream erupts briefly in darkness and then stops. Over generations, these experiences accumulate into collective memory. Fear becomes cultural inheritance. Even after agriculture spreads and large settlements emerge, the old anxieties persist. Farmers hear wolves beyond fields at night. Travelers avoid forests after sunset. Entire roads gain reputations for disappearances. Rural communities maintain fires, bells, dogs, and watchmen partly to push back against fears inherited from much older worlds. Civilization changes the shape of danger, but not the instinct itself. Because somewhere deep in human memory remains the ancient understanding that silence in darkness rarely means safety. Usually, it means something with teeth is already close enough not to need sound anymore. Long before organized religions build temples of stone, the dead already travel through the night. Ancient people do not experience death as something distant from daily life. In prehistoric communities, death remains physically close at all times. Children die young. Illness spreads unpredictably. Predators attack without warning. Storms, floods, starvation, and injury constantly threaten survival. Bodies are prepared, buried, burned, or exposed by people who personally know the dead. Grief unfolds not in sanitized spaces but directly within camps, caves, villages, and family shelters. And night changes everything about that grief. When darkness falls, the boundary between the living and the dead often feels dangerously thin. Silence deepens this sensation. During daylight, activity distracts the mind. Work continues. Hunting parties move outward. Fires burn openly. But after sunset, ancient people gather close together while the unseen world expands around them. Familiar sounds fade. Faces vanish into shadow. Memory grows stronger in darkness. The dead begin to feel near again. What survives in the archaeological record suggests that humans develop symbolic relationships with death astonishingly early. Intentional burials appear far back in prehistory. though scholars still debate exactly when ritual meaning becomes fully developed. Some graves contain tools, ornaments, pigments, flowers, or animal remains. Bodies are positioned carefully. Certain individuals receive unusual treatment suggesting emotional or spiritual significance beyond simple disposal. No single explanation fully accounts for these practices. Some may reflect affection, social identity, ancestor reverence, or beliefs about afterlife journeys. Yet across vastly different societies, nighttime repeatedly becomes associated with the return of the dead. Silence plays a central role in this transformation. In many ancient traditions, spirits do not arrive with chaos or noise. They arrive quietly. The absence of ordinary sound itself becomes unsettling because it suggests another presence entering the world. A windless night, a still forest, a sleeping village suddenly devoid of dogs barking or insects singing. Such moments acquire spiritual meaning precisely because they feel unnatural. Modern anthropology preserves countless echoes of these beliefs. Among cultures across Africa, Asia, Europe, Oceania, and the Americas, traditions emerge warning people not to call out into darkness unnecessarily because something else may answer. Certain names are avoided at night. Whistling after sunset becomes forbidden in some societies. Silence surrounding homes of the recently dead is treated carefully. In parts of the ancient world, mirrors are covered, fires maintained, or doorways protected during mourning periods because spirits are believed to linger nearby. These customs differ enormously in detail, yet they share a common emotional logic. The night is porous. The evidence remains incomplete regarding how far such beliefs stretch into deep prehistory, but burial practices strongly suggest that ancient humans spend considerable emotional energy negotiating relationships with the dead. Neanderthal burials, though still debated in some cases, may indicate forms of ritual care tens of thousands of years ago. Later, Upper Paleolithic graves become even more elaborate. One burial in Russia contains children interred with thousands of ivory beads requiring immense labor to produce. Elsewhere, red ochre is spread across bodies, perhaps symbolizing blood, life, rebirth, or something now lost entirely. Death is never treated casually, and silence surrounds it constantly. Imagine a small prehistoric group after losing one of its members during winter. The body lies near the edge of camp while burial preparations continue. Snow absorbs sound. Fire crackles weakly in freezing darkness. Every familiar noise seems altered by absence. One voice no longer speaks. One sleeping place remains empty. The silence becomes personal. Psychologists studying grief note that humans are highly sensitive to missing patterns. The absence of expected sounds can feel almost physically painful. Ancient people likely experienced this intensely in small communities where everyone depends closely on one another. The dead do not vanish immediately from emotional reality. People continue expecting footsteps, breathing, movement. Night amplifies these expectations. Some scholars argue that experiences associated with grief may help shape early spirit beliefs. Bereaved individuals across cultures sometimes report sensing the presence of the dead through dreams, sounds, fleeting movements, or powerful feelings during quiet nighttime hours. Modern neuroscience offers several possible explanations connected to memory, attachment, sleep states, and pattern recognition. Yet ancient people living without scientific frameworks often interpret such experiences differently. The dead are nearby because they are still here. Silence makes this interpretation convincing. Deep caves may intensify these beliefs further. Many prehistoric burial sites are located underground or within stone chambers separated from ordinary living areas. Darkness inside such places is absolute. Sounds echo strangely. Torches distort perception. The silence feels heavy rather than empty. Entering these spaces to leave bodies, offerings, or ritual objects likely produces profound psychological effects. What survives in the record suggests that caves frequently become associated with transitions between worlds. Some later mythologies explicitly describe entrances to underworlds inside mountains, caverns, or silent underground rivers. Scholars remain cautious about drawing direct lines from Paleolithic ritual to later mythology, but the emotional continuity is striking. The dead belong beneath the earth. The living fear what waits there in silence. As human societies grow more complex, organized ancestor worship emerges in many regions. The dead become protectors, judges, intermediaries, or sources of supernatural authority. Yet even revered ancestors remain unsettling after dark. In ancient Mesopotamia, restless spirits are believed capable of returning if burial rites fail. Egyptian tombs contain elaborate protections against disturbance. Greek traditions later describe wandering shades inhabiting dim, silent realms beneath the world. Across cultures, nighttime silence repeatedly signals possible contact with these unseen beings. Not all fears concern the honored dead. Many societies also develop terror surrounding improper death. Individuals who die violently, alone, unburied, or far from home are often believed more likely to return dangerously. Archaeologists occasionally uncover burials treated with unusual caution, bodies pinned with stones, isolated from cemeteries, or positioned strangely. Later historical examples become clearer, including anti-vampire burials in parts of medieval Europe. These practices reveal something ancient and persistent. People fear the silent dead most when death itself feels unresolved, and ancient life produces endless unresolved deaths. Travelers disappear into forests without bodies recovered. Floods sweep entire families away. Hunters vanish in mountains. Epidemics erase villages quickly. Predators scatter remains across wilderness. In many cases, survivors never fully know what happened. Silence fills the gap left by uncertainty. That uncertainty becomes fertile ground for supernatural imagination. Even today, modern people often feel uneasy in places associated with death after dark. Cemeteries become more frightening at night despite containing no greater objective danger. Abandoned buildings feel haunted partly because silence alters perception. The human mind begins searching for presence whenever ordinary sound disappears. Ancient people experienced this psychological tendency constantly, because in the oldest human memory, silence is never simply quiet. It is where the living listen for the footsteps of those who should no longer walk beside them. Nothing in the ancient world is more defenseless than a sleeping camp. By daylight, human beings compensate for physical weakness through cooperation, planning, and awareness. Groups gather food together. Hunters coordinate movements. Elders remember landscapes and seasons. Children remain protected within the community. Even small bands of prehistoric people can become remarkably resilient when awake and organized. Sleep destroys much of that protection. The moment a camp closes its eyes, danger changes shape entirely. Reaction slows. Fires burn lower. Guards grow tired. Attention narrows. In darkness, confusion spreads quickly, especially when fear arrives suddenly. Ancient people understand this long before written warfare, long before armies or fortified cities. The vulnerability of sleeping human beings becomes one of the oldest fears ever carried through the night, and silence often announces that vulnerability too late. Archaeological evidence from prehistoric violence remains difficult to interpret because organic materials disappear, and ancient conflict rarely leaves complete records. Yet enough survives to reveal a troubling pattern stretching deep into human history. Some sites preserve signs of massacres, ambushes, and sudden attacks against entire communities. Skeletons appear with blunt force trauma, embedded projectile points, or defensive injuries suggesting close violence. In certain locations, bodies remain unburied, implying catastrophic events that survivors either could not or would not properly address. Many of these attacks likely happen at night. What survives in ethnographic records among later traditional societies suggests that darkness offers enormous tactical advantage for raiders. A sleeping camp is disoriented immediately. Fires illuminate defenders while concealing attackers beyond the light. Panic spreads faster in darkness because people cannot judge numbers or directions clearly. Children become separated. Escape routes vanish. Even small assaults can produce overwhelming chaos. Silence before attack, therefore, becomes terrifyingly meaningful. Imagine a settlement beside a river several thousand years ago. Dogs bark occasionally through the night. Insects pulse from nearby reeds. Wind moves gently through trees. Families sleep near shared fires while a few sentries remain awake at the edges of camp. Then the sounds begin fading. Birds disappear into stillness. Dogs stop barking abruptly. The silence deepens. Someone is already close. Among many ancient and traditional societies, nighttime raids become feared not only because of violence itself, but because of uncertainty afterward. Attackers may steal food, tools, animals, or captives before vanishing again into darkness. Entire people disappear silently from the perspective of survivors. This creates a psychological environment where nighttime quiet no longer feels neutral. Silence becomes anticipation. The evidence remains incomplete regarding the full scale of prehistoric warfare. Scholars debate intensely how violent early human societies actually are. Some researchers argue that organized conflict becomes widespread mainly after agriculture, property accumulation, and territorial settlement. Others point toward evidence of interpersonal violence extending much further into the Paleolithic. No single explanation fully accounts for the complexity of human conflict. Still, even limited violence would leave enormous emotional impact in small communities. Losing only a few individuals can threaten the survival of an entire group. A nighttime attack therefore carries consequences beyond immediate death. It can destroy knowledge, social bonds, childcare systems, food security, and memory accumulated across generations. And unlike storms or predators, human attackers think strategically. That possibility changes how ancient people interpret silence around camp boundaries. A predator may stalk instinctively, but another human group can wait patiently, communicate quietly, and exploit darkness deliberately. The forest growing silent may not signal an animal at all. It may signal listening humans hidden nearby. This uncertainty shapes ancient settlement patterns profoundly. Early villages often position themselves near defensible terrain. Some communities build on elevated ground or islands. Others surround sleeping areas with thorn barriers, wooden palisades, or ditches once agriculture allows larger permanent settlements. Firelight remains important not merely for warmth but visibility. Noise itself becomes protective. Bells, drums, dogs, and nighttime activity discourage stealth. Civilization gradually develops partly as an architecture against silent intrusion. Yet complete security never exists. One especially haunting aspect of ancient nighttime fear is disappearance without explanation. Archaeological sites occasionally reveal settlements abandoned rapidly, with possessions left behind strangely intact. Sometimes environmental disaster explains the evidence: drought, flood, disease, or resource collapse force migration. In other cases, violence seems possible but uncertain. Human remains are missing. Structures burn unevenly, the record fragments. To later generations, such places acquire reputations. A village stands empty. No one fully remembers why. The silence around it thickens over time. Folklore grows easily from these ruins. Stories emerge about cursed nights, vanished inhabitants, spirits carrying people away, or enemies arriving without warning. Ancient listeners do not need complete evidence to fear such possibilities. Human imagination fills silence quickly, especially when communities already understand how vulnerable sleep makes them. Children absorb these anxieties from birth. In many traditional societies documented historically, nighttime rules governing movement are strict and emotionally charged. Young people are warned not to wander beyond firelight. Certain whistles or calls are forbidden after dark because they may attract hostile forces, human or supernatural. Outsiders arriving silently at night are treated cautiously. Even within large settlements, watch systems evolve to ensure somebody always remains alert. The ancient camp must never fully surrender itself to sleep. Modern sleep research reveals something fascinating in this context. Human beings sleeping in unfamiliar or threatening environments often experience what scientists call the first night effect, where part of the brain remains more alert even during rest. Some researchers suggest this may preserve evolutionary survival advantages inherited from ancestral conditions, where deep unguarded sleep could prove fatal. In other words, the ancient fear of nighttime vulnerability may still exist biologically inside modern people. That fear becomes stronger in silence. A noisy environment can mask danger psychologically because sound suggests ongoing life and activity. Silence removes reassurance. A sleeping camp that suddenly grows too quiet feels exposed. Every person awake senses it immediately. Even today, many people report waking instinctively when familiar nighttime sounds stop unexpectedly. The nervous system listens constantly for disruption. Ancient religions and myths often encode this vulnerability symbolically. Night demons attack sleepers. Spirits enter silently through openings in homes. Witches or supernatural beings arrive during still hours before dawn. Protective rituals emerge around doors, windows, fires, and sleeping places. Some traditions place objects beside beds specifically to ward off nighttime intrusion. Scholars still debate how directly such beliefs connect to real threats versus broader psychological anxieties, but the overlap remains striking. Human beings repeatedly imagine danger entering silently while communities sleep, because for most of history, that danger sometimes did. Somewhere beyond the dying fire, footsteps move carefully through darkness. No birds call anymore. Even the wind seems to hesitate. And inside the sleeping camp, nobody yet knows whether morning will come normally at all. Some landscapes create fear even when nothing is there. Ancient people learn quickly that silence behaves differently depending on where it settles. In forests, silence often means hidden movement. Along open plains, it can signal predators or storms approaching from immense distances. But there are places where silence itself seems unnatural from the beginning. Places where sound twists strangely, disappears entirely, or returns in distorted fragments. Caves, deserts, frozen valleys, volcanic fields, deep canyons. Abandoned ruins, these environments reshape human perception so powerfully that many become sacred, forbidden, or haunted across generations. Long before science explains acoustics, weather patterns, or neurological stress responses, ancient people already understand that certain places change the mind. Wind plays a major role in this transformation. In mountainous terrain, air moves unpredictably through narrow passes and stone chambers, producing low vibrations, sudden whistles, or long mournful tones that resemble distant voices. Some caves amplify tiny noises while swallowing others completely. Deserts can fall into stretches of stillness so complete that footsteps seem intrusive against the emptiness. Snow-covered valleys absorb sound until the world feels physically muted. Ancient travellers entering such places often describe sensations of isolation far beyond ordinary loneliness. The landscape itself begins to feel aware. What survives in mythology from many cultures reflects this recurring emotional experience. Mountains become homes of gods or spirits. Deep caves transform into entrances to underworlds. Silent deserts become places of testing, madness, or revelation. Frozen wildernesses acquire reputations for consuming travellers without trace. Scholars remain cautious about reducing spiritual beliefs to environmental psychology alone. Yet the connection between strange landscapes and supernatural fear appears repeatedly across human history. No single explanation fully accounts for this pattern. Part of the answer may lie in how human brains interpret uncertainty. Modern neuroscience suggests that the mind constantly predicts sensory information based on expectation. Environments disrupting those expectations can produce anxiety, disorientation, and heightened awareness. Silence intensifies these effects because it removes familiar reference points. Ancient people encounter this phenomenon without modern frameworks to explain it. Imagine entering a massive cave system with only flickering torches sometime during the Upper Paleolithic. Smoke thickens overhead. Light barely reaches beyond rough stone walls. Sound echoes irregularly. A dropped pebble may seem impossibly loud while distant footsteps vanish entirely. Deep inside, the silence between noises grows oppressive. Time becomes difficult to measure. Orientation slips away easily. Archaeologists studying cave sites often note how dangerous such journeys truly are. Narrow passages collapse. Air quality changes unexpectedly. Darkness beyond torchlight is absolute. Yet prehistoric people repeatedly venture into these spaces, sometimes carrying pigments, carvings, ritual objects, or musical instruments far beyond practical living areas. Something about silence underground draws them inward despite the danger. Some researchers believe caves may have produced altered psychological states naturally through darkness, echoing sound, low oxygen levels, and social ritual. Flickering torchlight causes painted animals on cave walls to appear almost alive in motion. Shadows distort human figures into unfamiliar forms. Silence becomes emotionally charged because every small sound gains enormous significance. The evidence remains incomplete regarding exactly how prehistoric people interpreted these experiences. Were caves sacred? Revered as gateways to spiritual worlds, different groups likely held different beliefs across immense spans of time. Still, what survives strongly suggests that underground silence was never considered ordinary. The same pattern appears in deserts. To modern observers, deserts often seem empty, but ancient travellers know better. Deserts are alive with subtle movement and danger. Wind reshapes dunes overnight. Heat distorts vision. Distances deceive the eye. Water disappears suddenly. During daylight, deserts can feel brutally loud with insects, wind, shifting sand, and cracking heat. Yet nighttime in large desert regions sometimes brings astonishing stillness. No trees move, no rivers flow, no animal sounds remain nearby. The silence becomes vast enough to feel physical. Many desert cultures develop traditions warning against traveling during certain nighttime conditions because orientation collapses easily in darkness and stillness. Oral histories from parts of North Africa and the Middle East describe spirits, voices, or invisible beings inhabiting lonely, silent places far from settlements. Scholars recognize that such traditions often serve practical purposes as survival knowledge, discouraging dangerous travel across unstable terrain. Yet emotional fear clearly accompanies these stories too. Silence in empty landscapes magnifies human vulnerability. Frozen environments create similar effects. Snow absorbs sound exceptionally well, producing eerie quiet across forests and open tundra. Before blizzards, wind may suddenly vanish altogether, creating moments of calm that experienced Arctic peoples learn to distrust deeply. Modern meteorologists explain some of these atmospheric shifts scientifically, but ancient communities interpret them through lived experience first. The silence before disaster becomes unforgettable. Volcanic landscapes intensify this further. Around active volcanoes, forests occasionally fall strangely silent before eruptions as animals flee changing environmental conditions. Ancient people witnessing these moments may connect silence directly with divine anger or supernatural warning. Historical accounts from later civilizations sometimes describe unsettling stillness before catastrophic events such as earthquakes, ashfall, or poisonous gas releases. Scholars still debate how consistently animals detect such changes in advance, but enough documented cases exist to keep the question alive. What matters psychologically is that ancient people repeatedly experience silence preceding catastrophe. Over time, certain locations accumulate reputations shaped by these experiences. Valleys where travelers vanish, lakes where no birds gather, forest clearings where sound behaves strangely, abandoned ruins where wind moves through broken stone like distant breathing. Even after practical reasons are forgotten, fear remains attached to the landscape itself. Children inherit these maps of unease. Do not sleep there. Do not enter that cave after sunset. Do not cross that valley in silence. Do not answer voices in the desert at night. Modern people often underestimate how acoustically alive the pre-industrial world once was. Without engines, electrical systems, or constant urban noise, changes in environmental sound became dramatically more noticeable. Silence therefore carried emotional force modern listeners rarely experience fully anymore. Yet traces remain. People entering abandoned buildings often lower their voices instinctively. Dense fog creates unease, partly because sound becomes distorted. Snowstorms still make familiar places feel alien. Deep underground tunnels trigger anxiety even in trained explorers. Silence in certain environments continues affecting the nervous system because the underlying human responses are ancient. Some landscapes simply remind the brain too strongly of how fragile human beings really are. And in those places, the absence of sound stops feeling peaceful altogether. It begins to feel like waiting. Not every vanished settlement leaves behind signs of battle. Sometimes the silence is all that remains. Across the ancient world, archaeologists repeatedly uncover places where human life appears to stop abruptly and without clear explanation. Fires go cold, homes stand partially intact, tools remain scattered where they were last used, storage vessels sit abandoned, pathways disappear beneath dust, sand, forest, or volcanic ash. In some locations, there are signs of violence. In others, there are almost none at all. For the people living nearby afterward, such places rarely feel ordinary. A silent village unsettles the human mind because villages are supposed to breathe with sound. Children run between shelters, animals move constantly, cooking fires crackle, voices carry through darkness after sunset. Every settlement develops its own rhythm of life. When that rhythm disappears completely, especially without obvious reason, absence itself becomes frightening. Ancient people do not need archaeology to feel this. They encounter abandoned places directly. A hunting party discovers a riverside camp deserted unexpectedly. Hearths are cold. Food remains untouched. No bodies are visible. Another group crossing grasslands finds ruined shelters slowly collapsing into weather and silence. Travellers enter empty villages where wind moves through doorways once crowded with life. Sometimes survivors know exactly what happened. Disease, drought, warfare, migration, or famine may already be remembered. But often the full story fades quickly. The evidence remains incomplete even for modern researchers studying much more recent collapses. Archaeology preserves fragments, not full narratives. Wood rots, cloth disappears. Oral histories vanish with populations. Environmental conditions erase evidence unevenly. A settlement abandoned during slow drought may look strangely similar to one emptied suddenly by panic. No single explanation fully accounts for many ancient disappearances. This uncertainty shapes human imagination powerfully. One of the oldest and most universal fears is the fear of communities erased quietly. Not heroic destruction, not glorious battle, simply absence. A place where life should exist but no longer does. Silence becomes contagious in such locations. Consider prehistoric settlements abandoned after environmental collapse. During severe droughts, rivers shrink slowly year after year, crops fail repeatedly. Families leave in stages searching for better land. Eventually, only a few people remain behind among empty structures and dry wells. By the time neighbouring groups arrive later, the settlement may already feel haunted. Wind moves through vacant spaces once filled with noise. Animals reclaim abandoned paths. Night settles differently over places no longer occupied by human life. The emotional effect must have been profound. Archaeological evidence from ancient climate disasters reveals how widespread such experiences likely were. Entire regions periodically become uninhabitable through shifting rainfall, volcanic eruptions, disease outbreaks, or resource depletion. The ancient Sahara, now largely desert, once contained lakes, grasslands, and thriving human populations before long-term climate change forced migration. Settlements disappear gradually across landscapes, becoming increasingly silent and dry. To later generations, these lost places become warnings. Sometimes collapse happens much faster. Volcanic eruptions can erase communities within hours. Earthquakes destabilize entire regions overnight. Floods sweep away villages before dawn. In such cases, survivors may encounter silence almost immediately afterward. A thriving settlement one week becomes buried ruin the next. Ash muffles sound unnaturally. Floodwater leaves debris tangled in trees and stone. Entire families vanish without proper burial. The silence following catastrophe often feels more terrifying than the disaster itself. Historical examples preserved in written records later reinforce this fear. After the eruption of Mount Vesuvius eruption of 79 CE, Roman accounts describe eerie stillness settling over devastated areas beneath ash clouds. In other disasters throughout antiquity, survivors repeatedly note the unnatural quiet after destruction. Birds vanish. human activity stops. Familiar soundscapes collapse entirely. Ancient people begin associating silence not only with immediate danger but with aftermath. The world after disaster becomes acoustically wrong. Some abandoned sites acquire spiritual reputations almost immediately. Ancient ruins across Mesopotamia, the Mediterranean, Mesoamerica, and elsewhere often become linked with curses, divine punishment, ghosts, or forbidden memory. Later populations avoid sleeping there. Travelers move through cautiously. Ritual offerings appear among broken structures centuries after original inhabitants vanish. Scholars still debate how much continuity exists between ancient abandonment and later folklore, but patterns recur consistently. Humans interpret silent ruins emotionally, not just practically. Part of this reaction may stem from social instincts deeply rooted in human evolution. People are intensely sensitive to signs of missing human presence. A populated settlement produces endless sensory reassurance smoke, voices, movement, smell, animals, fire, light. When all these signals disappear, the mind immediately recognizes abnormality. Even modern cities demonstrate this effect during evacuations or disasters. Empty streets feel disturbing precisely because human spaces are designed around constant activity. Ancient settlements likely produce this sensation even more strongly because surrounding wilderness presses so closely against daily life. Once people leave, nature returns quickly. Grass grows through floors, animals den inside houses, insects fill silent rooms. Trees split abandoned stone over centuries. The transformation can seem almost supernatural to observers watching it happen gradually across generations. In some regions, entire cultures later build myths around vanished peoples who supposedly disappeared into forests, mountains, seas, or underground worlds. Archaeologists now understand that many such stories likely preserve fragmented memory of migration, collapse, or assimilation. Yet for ancient listeners, the mystery itself matters more than historical precision. Communities can disappear. The night can swallow entire worlds. That possibility leaves deep marks on collective memory. Perhaps most unsettling are sites where evidence remains ambiguous even today. Certain prehistoric settlements show signs of orderly departure, mixed with traces of violence or ritual abandonment difficult to interpret clearly. Some houses appear deliberately sealed. Valuable objects remain unexpectedly behind. Human remains are absent where archaeologists might expect them. Scholars propose competing explanations involving migration, warfare, environmental stress, ceremonial closure, or combinations of all three. The silence surrounding these places continues. Modern excavation teams often describe emotional reactions while working in abandoned settlements. Even with scientific training, researchers report feelings of unease walking through silent streets where human life once flourished intensely. Empty doorways, cold hearths, personal objects untouched for centuries or millennia. The absence becomes strangely intimate. Ancient people undoubtedly feel this too, but without modern historical distance. For them, silent ruins are not archaeological sites. They are proof that entire communities can vanish while the surrounding world keeps breathing normally around them. A fire burns one night, children sleep beside it, voices fill the darkness. Then eventually only wind remains. Sometimes the world becomes silent before it breaks apart. Long before instruments measure atmospheric pressure or seismic vibrations, ancient people notice a disturbing pattern repeated across generations. Certain disasters arrive not with immediate chaos, but with moments of unnatural calm beforehand. Winds weaken suddenly, birds disappear, insects stop calling, water stills. Entire landscapes seem to pause as though waiting for something enormous to happen. For people already conditioned to fear silence at night, these moments feel deeply wrong, and often they are right to feel that way. Modern science confirms that animals sometimes react to environmental changes before humans consciously recognize them. Shifts in air pressure before storms, subtle ground vibrations preceding earthquakes, chemical changes near volcanic activity, or unusual electrical conditions in the atmosphere may alter animal behavior. Scholars still debate exactly how reliable these reactions are and how consistently they occur. But historical observations from many cultures align remarkably well on one point. Nature occasionally falls silent before catastrophe. Ancient communities living closely tied to the environment would almost certainly notice these disruptions with extraordinary sensitivity. Unlike modern urban populations surrounded by constant artificial noise, prehistoric and early agricultural societies depend on environmental sound continuously for orientation and survival. Any large-scale interruption becomes immediately meaningful. Imagine a coastal settlement thousands of years ago, shortly before a massive storm or tsunami. Fishermen notice seabirds moving inland unusually early. The shoreline grows strangely quiet. Wind that should be building instead fades into heavy stillness. Dogs whine or refuse to settle. The sea itself may appear unnaturally calm. No scientific explanation exists yet, only dread. Historical records from later civilizations preserve countless descriptions of eerie silence before disaster. Roman writers describe unusual atmospheric stillness before earthquakes. Medieval chronicles mention forests becoming quiet before severe storms. Oral traditions from Pacific Island cultures include warnings about strange calm along shorelines before deadly waves arrive. In parts of Asia, stories persist about animals fleeing mountainsides before eruptions or landslides. The evidence remains incomplete, and not every account can be verified. Human memory reshapes events, especially traumatic ones. Survivors naturally search for warning signs afterward. Yet enough patterns recur across geography and time to suggest ancient people are observing genuine environmental phenomena, even if they interpret them through spiritual or supernatural frameworks. Silence becomes an omen because it repeatedly precedes devastation. Volcanoes provide some of the most terrifying examples. Before eruptions, surrounding ecosystems sometimes behave unpredictably. Toxic gases seep invisibly into valleys. Animals flee disturbed habitats. Water sources change temperature or taste. Forests near volcanic zones may fall quiet as wildlife abandons the region. Ancient communities living near active volcanoes cannot understand tectonic systems, but they understand fear. Many volcanic cultures eventually associate mountains with gods, imprisoned forces, or divine anger. Scholars studying mythological traditions around volcanoes often note how frequently silence and stillness appear in descriptions preceding eruptions. The mountain becomes quiet, then the world explodes. One of the most catastrophic examples in human prehistory may be the eruption of Toba supereruption roughly 74,000 years ago in present-day Indonesia. The event releases unimaginable amounts of ash into the atmosphere. Scientists continue debating exactly how severely it impacts global human populations, but regional devastation is beyond question. Entire ecosystems collapse beneath ashfall and climatic disruption. No human records survive from this time, only geological evidence and scattered traces of survival. Yet it is difficult not to imagine the silence before such a catastrophe. Forests emptying, animals fleeing. Strange stillness around rivers and valleys shortly before darkness and ash consume the sky. Earthquakes create another terrifying relationship with silence. Modern reports occasionally describe sudden quiet before major seismic events. Dogs stop barking, birds vanish, even insects seem absent. Researchers remain cautious because evidence is inconsistent and anecdotal in many cases. Still, ancient people experiencing repeated earthquakes across generations likely notice enough unusual patterns to associate silence directly with disaster. And earthquakes are especially frightening because they transform stable ground itself into uncertainty. For agricultural societies, this carries enormous emotional impact. Villages and cities represent permanence. Fields, walls, roads, and temples anchor human order against chaos. Earthquakes shatter that illusion instantly. The silence beforehand therefore becomes almost sacred in hindsight, a final warning from the world itself before destruction arrives. Floods produce similar memories. Ancient river civilizations depend completely on predictable water cycles, yet rivers can also become agents of sudden death. In some flood traditions, survivors describe unsettling calm before waters rise catastrophically. Heavy humid stillness settles over landscapes, animal behavior changes, even wind seems suspended. The silence afterward may be worse. Entire settlements disappear beneath mud and debris. Survivors search through drowned landscapes where familiar sounds are gone completely. No livestock, no voices, no fires burning, only water moving slowly through ruins. These experiences shape mythology deeply. Across cultures, catastrophic floods often become moral or spiritual stories as much as environmental memories. Divine punishment, cosmic cleansing, or angry gods explain destruction too vast for ordinary understanding. Yet beneath these narratives remains the sensory reality. Ancient people actually experience the unnatural stillness before everything changes. Silence becomes part of the disaster itself. Even drought carries acoustic transformation. As climates shift and water sources fail, landscapes gradually lose sound. Rivers shrink. Birds migrate elsewhere. Insects disappear from dry grasslands. Human settlements once filled with activity grow quieter each season. Archaeologists studying long-term collapses linked to climate stress sometimes describe how environmental degradation slowly empties regions over generations. The world itself seems to withdraw from human presence. Ancient people likely interpret these silent transformations spiritually because the scale feels overwhelming. A forest dying from drought does not simply lose resources, it loses voice. A riverbed cracking beneath sun no longer sounds alive. Silence spreads geographically. No single explanation fully accounts for how ancient cultures emotionally processed environmental catastrophe. But one pattern remains constant. Sound and life are connected. Silence and danger are connected. When entire landscapes fall quiet unexpectedly, human beings instinctively fear what comes next. Modern people still react similarly. Before severe storms, many individuals describe feeling uneasy during sudden atmospheric stillness. Empty cities during disasters feel emotionally disturbing, partly because familiar human sound disappears. Even contemporary accounts of eclipses, wildfires, and approaching tsunamis often emphasize strange quiet among animals beforehand. The ancient instinct survives because the pattern survives too. Sometimes silence really does mean the world is about to change violently, and for countless generations, human beings living close to nature learn this lesson in the hardest possible way. The night grows still, the birds disappear, the wind stops moving, and somewhere beyond the darkness, catastrophe is already on its way. Not all silence terrifies because it hides danger. Sometimes it terrifies because people believe something immense is listening. As human societies become more organized and spiritually complex, silence begins acquiring meanings beyond survival alone. The ancient fear born from predators, darkness, and catastrophe slowly intertwines with religion. Gods emerge not only through thunder, storms, or heavenly signs, but through absence, through stillness, through the terrible feeling that the ordinary world has paused because an unseen presence has entered it. In many traditions, divine power does not always announce itself loudly. It arrives when everything else becomes quiet. This transformation appears across civilizations separated by vast distances and histories. Temples are often designed as spaces insulated from ordinary sound. Sacred caves lie far from populated settlements. Rituals require periods of silence before offerings or ceremonies begin. Priests, shamans, monks, and initiates withdraw into isolated places where silence sharpens perception and dissolves familiar reality. What begins as environmental fear gradually becomes spiritual technology. The evidence remains incomplete regarding how early these associations develop, but prehistoric ritual behavior strongly suggests that silence already carries symbolic weight long before written theology. Deep cave sanctuaries, isolated burial chambers, and carefully chosen ceremonial landscapes indicate that ancient people repeatedly seek locations separated from ordinary human noise. Such places feel closer to other worlds. In ancient Mesopotamia, silence sometimes accompanies divine judgment. Gods withdraw their protection quietly before cities fall. Omens appear through absence rather than spectacle. In ancient Egypt, temple rituals often involve controlled sacred stillness, where priests move through dim interior chambers, isolated from outside sound and sunlight. In Greek traditions, certain oracles deliver prophecy from caves, fissures, or silent sanctuaries where altered states blur boundaries between human and divine perception. Silence becomes proof that ordinary reality has weakened. This idea appears especially strongly in deserts. Across the ancient Near East, North Africa, and Central Asia, deserts acquire powerful spiritual reputations partly because of their emptiness and silence. Prophets, hermits, and seekers withdraw into barren landscapes seeking revelation. Yet many also describe terror, hallucination, temptation, or encounters with hostile supernatural forces. The desert strips away distraction. Silence fills the void left behind. Modern psychologists note that prolonged sensory deprivation can alter perception dramatically. Isolation and reduced environmental stimulation may intensify internal thoughts, emotional responses, and even auditory experiences. Ancient people, during long periods alone in deserts, caves, mountains, or forests, likely experienced such effects without scientific explanation. The gods seem close because the human mind itself begins changing. No single explanation fully accounts for ancient mystical experiences. Of course, religious belief cannot simply be reduced to neurology or environment, yet the physical conditions surrounding many sacred experiences are strikingly consistent: darkness, silence, fasting, isolation, rhythmic sound, repetitive prayer, or sensory disruption. The nervous system becomes unusually open to interpretation. In many cultures, divine silence itself becomes frightening. Gods who refuse to answer prayers are often portrayed as terrifying precisely because silence suggests abandonment. Ancient communities depend emotionally and materially on maintaining favorable relationships with unseen powers. Crops fail, disease spreads, armies approach. When rituals produce no response, silence becomes unbearable. The heavens themselves seem empty. Some of the oldest surviving religious texts contain this anxiety clearly. Appeals to absent gods, unanswered prayers, and silent heavens appear throughout ancient literature. Priests perform ceremonies desperately seeking signs. Diviners interpret tiny changes in weather, animal behavior, dreams, or celestial events because silence from the divine realm feels dangerous. Human beings are uncomfortable when powerful forces refuse to speak. Sacred architecture reflects this tension physically. Many temples are designed to manipulate sound deliberately. Massive stone halls amplify footsteps and whispers. Inner sanctuaries remain dark and quiet compared to bustling cities outside. Ritual participants move from noisy public space into increasingly silent chambers, psychologically preparing them for contact with divine presence. Ancient builders may not understand acoustics scientifically, but they understand emotional effect with remarkable sophistication. Even tombs participate in this relationship between silence and sacred fear. Royal burial chambers across civilizations are often sealed behind layers of stone, earth, or hidden passageways intended to preserve eternal stillness. Disturbing that silence becomes taboo. Curses surrounding tomb violations likely serve practical purposes, partly deterring robbery. Yet they also reflect genuine unease about interrupting spaces belonging to the dead and the divine. Silence inside tombs feels inhabited. Some rituals intentionally use silence to induce awe or fear. Ceremonies begin after long stillness. Participants wait through darkness before sacred revelation occurs. In mystery religions of the ancient Mediterranean, initiates may experience hidden rites involving silence, isolation, or sensory confusion intended to transform consciousness emotionally. Scholars still debate exactly what happened within many such rituals because secrecy was often central to their meaning. Yet surviving descriptions repeatedly emphasize overwhelming emotional intensity connected to darkness and silence. The absence of sound becomes part of the revelation itself. Meanwhile, ordinary people continue carrying older fears alongside newer religious interpretations. A silent forest may contain predators, spirits, or gods simultaneously in the imagination. These explanations do not necessarily compete. Ancient thought often allows practical and supernatural understanding to overlap naturally. A valley is dangerous because wolves hunt there, and because spirits dwell there, and because the gods marked it long ago. All these ideas can coexist. This blending of fear and sacredness helps explain why certain silent places become protected or forbidden across generations. Groves remain untouched. Mountains are climbed only ritually. Caves are sealed. Lakes become sacred. Such traditions may preserve ecological wisdom, territorial boundaries, spiritual belief, or memory of ancient disasters all at once. Silence protects mystery. Even today, modern people entering vast cathedrals, ancient ruins, deep caves, or isolated deserts often lower their voices instinctively. Part of this response is cultural conditioning, but part may be older. Humans seem naturally inclined to associate great silence with presence rather than emptiness. Something important feels near, something larger than the self, something difficult to explain rationally. Ancient people live with this sensation constantly, because in the old world, silence at night is never merely quiet weather or empty air. It is possibility, judgment, warning, memory, spirit, God, predator, death, or perhaps all of them together. The fire burns low, the camp grows still, above the darkness. The stars remain silent too, and sometimes that silence feels heavier than any sound human beings could ever make. The ancient fear of silence does not disappear when people understand more about the world. In some ways, it becomes easier to explain. In other ways, it becomes harder to escape. Modern neuroscience, psychology, and anthropology now offer partial insight into why silence at night affects human beings so deeply. Yet the more researchers study the human brain, the clearer it becomes that ancient people are not irrational for fearing silence. Their nervous systems are responding to conditions shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of survival. The human mind is not designed for perfect calm. It is designed for vigilance. Even during sleep, the brain continues monitoring the environment constantly. Certain sounds are filtered out because they signal safety through familiarity, steady rain, insect rhythms, breathing nearby, distant water, crackling fire. But sudden changes command attention immediately. Parents wake when a child stops breathing normally. Campers wake when forest sounds vanish. Soldiers in combat zones often wake during unusual silence more quickly than during noise. The nervous system notices absence as powerfully as presence. Researchers studying auditory processing describe the brain as a prediction machine. Human perception depends heavily on expectation. The mind continuously anticipates incoming sensory information based on patterns. When expected, sound disappears unexpectedly. Prediction fails. Attention spikes automatically. Ancient humans living in dangerous environments would benefit enormously from such sensitivity. Those who ignored silence may not survive long enough to pass on their instincts. This possibility helps explain why silence feels emotionally charged even in modern safe environments. A person alone in an apartment may suddenly become uneasy when familiar city noise stops during the night. Power outages feel disturbing partly because electrical hum disappears. Snowfall changes the emotional atmosphere of entire neighborhoods because sound becomes muted and strange. The body reacts before conscious reasoning fully catches up. Some psychologists connect this reaction to hypervigilant systems inherited from ancestral survival pressures. In prehistoric environments, silence could signal predators, hostile humans, environmental danger, or social isolation. Human beings who responded rapidly to unexpected quiet may possess survival advantages over those who remained relaxed. The evidence remains incomplete regarding exactly how specific evolutionary pressures shape modern emotional responses. Human behavior emerges from complex interactions between biology, culture, memory, and personal experience. Still, cross-cultural patterns surrounding nighttime silence remain remarkably consistent. People everywhere become more alert when the world suddenly grows too quiet. Isolation intensifies this dramatically. Modern experiments involving sensory deprivation reveal how profoundly silence affects the human mind over time. Participants placed in environments with minimal sound often report anxiety, disorientation, intrusive thoughts, altered perception of time, and even hallucinations after relatively short periods. Total silence is psychologically difficult for many individuals to tolerate. Ancient people encounter conditions approaching this naturally in caves, deserts, winter landscapes, deep forests, or solitary travel. Without modern scientific explanations, such experiences easily acquire spiritual or supernatural meaning. One especially important factor is that human beings are intensely social creatures. Throughout most of evolutionary history, isolation itself is dangerous. Separation from the group increases vulnerability to predators, starvation, injury, and exposure. Silence at night therefore may trigger not only fear of external danger, but fear of abandonment. A quiet camp can mean everyone else is gone. This possibility leaves deep marks on the mind. Anthropologists studying traditional societies often note how rarely people choose complete solitude voluntarily compared to modern industrial cultures. Sleeping alone, travelling alone, or remaining isolated after dark is frequently discouraged. Human beings evolve within groups where constant sensory reassurance from others' breathing, movement, speech, coughing, shared activity signals safety. Silence removes those signals. The emotional effect can become overwhelming under stress. Survivors of disasters, warfare, or wilderness exposure often describe silence afterward as one of the most frightening aspects of trauma, not necessarily because silence itself is harmful, but because it magnifies uncertainty and expectation. Something should be happening. Someone should be nearby. The world should not feel this empty. The brain begins searching desperately for explanation. This may partially explain why people throughout history populate silence with imagined presence. Ghosts, spirits, demons, watchers, gods, intruders. The mind prefers almost any explanation over pure uncertainty. Neuroscientists studying threat perception note that human cognition is biased toward detecting agency. In dangerous environments, assuming something is there when nothing is present is safer than missing genuine danger. Ancient people live inside this psychological system continuously. Darkness amplifies it further. Human vision degrades dramatically in low light. Ambiguous shapes become difficult to interpret. Peripheral movement triggers alarm easily. The brain compensates by relying more heavily on sound. When sound disappears too, uncertainty expands rapidly. The result is ancient nighttime fear. Interestingly, modern urban environments may suppress but not erase these instincts. Cities produce near-constant background noise masking environmental silence. Electrical systems hum continuously. Traffic moves through darkness. Artificial light reduces uncertainty. Yet many people still report discomfort in unusually silent urban settings. Empty office buildings at night, abandoned subway tunnels, evacuated streets during emergencies, or isolated parking structures often provoke disproportionate unease. The ancient response remains active beneath civilization. Researchers studying fear also note how imagination intensifies under uncertain conditions. The human brain is especially vulnerable to catastrophic thinking when information is incomplete. Silence creates exactly such conditions. A visible threat can be assessed. An invisible threat hidden somewhere in darkness cannot. Ancient people therefore often fear silence more than noise itself. A storm approaching can be understood. Predators roaring in distance can be tracked. Even battle carries sound and orientation. But silence conceals intention. Some modern survival experts point out that experienced wilderness travelers continue relying heavily on changes in environmental sound. Forests becoming quiet may indeed indicate large animal movement nearby. Sudden silence among birds sometimes precedes hawk attacks or predators entering an area. While not mystical, these reactions reveal that the ancient instinct still operates in real ecological systems. The world remains acoustically alive whether modern people notice it or not. No single explanation fully accounts for the emotional power silence holds across human history. Biology alone cannot explain mythology, religion, ritual, and folklore. Yet biology clearly contributes. Ancient people fear silence partly because their bodies are built to fear it, and modern people inherit those bodies. Somewhere deep beneath language and culture, the nervous system still remembers nights beside fragile fires when sudden quiet in the darkness could mean death approaching silently through the trees. The world changes, civilizations rise, Technology surrounds human life, but the old instincts remain awake, listening. As cities grow larger, human beings begin fighting silence deliberately. The earliest permanent settlements are never completely quiet. Even small farming villages produce constant sound compared to prehistoric camps. Animals move within enclosed spaces. Grinding stones scrape grain into flour. Water is carried, stored, and poured. Children play between houses. Fires burn continuously for cooking and warmth. As populations increase, these overlapping noises create something ancient hunter-gatherers rarely experienced before: human sound strong enough to overpower parts of the natural world. This changes the emotional relationship between people and night. In villages and early cities, silence no longer belongs entirely to forests or wilderness. Instead, silence inside populated areas begins to feel abnormal, dangerous, wrong. A thriving settlement should remain noisy even after sunset. If it grows too still, something has gone terribly badly. Civilization becomes an acoustic shield against fear. Archaeological evidence from ancient urban centers suggests that nighttime activity is far more common than many modern people imagine. Markets may close after dark, but cities rarely sleep completely. Guards patrol walls and gates. Religious ceremonies continue through portions of the night. Bakers begin work before dawn. Animals cry out from courtyards and alleys. In port cities, ships arrive unpredictably with tides and weather. Large populations naturally generate continuous human presence, and that presence is reassuring. In places like ancient Rome, nighttime streets are famously loud by pre-modern standards. Historical writers complain about carts rattling through narrow roads, crowds gathering late into the evening, taverns overflowing with noise, and constant movement through crowded districts. Roman authorities occasionally attempt regulating certain nighttime activities precisely because cities remain active long after sunset. Part of this constant activity may simply reflect practical urban life. Part may reflect something older. People feel safer when human sound surrounds them. The same pattern appears across many civilizations. Ancient Babylon, Alexandria, and large cities in ancient China, India, and Mesoamerica all developed systems intended partly to maintain order through the night. Torches illuminate streets. Patrols move visibly through urban spaces. Bells or drums signal time and danger. Dogs roam near homes and markets. Religious chants echo from temples before dawn. Noise itself becomes infrastructure. The evidence remains incomplete regarding how consciously ancient urban planners think about psychological fear, but city design repeatedly reveals concern with visibility, sound, and communal presence after dark. Walls separate populated interiors from threatening wilderness beyond. Gates close at night. Watchmen call out through streets at regular intervals. Firelight spreads through dense neighborhoods. Silence beyond the walls still exists. Inside the city, people resist it together. Yet cities create new anxieties too. Urban silence can become terrifying precisely because it violates expectation so completely. A rural traveller entering a quiet forest understands the environment naturally contains danger and isolation. But a city suddenly falling silent suggests catastrophe, disease, siege, fire, riot, abandonment, death. Ancient historical records repeatedly describe this transformation during crisis. During plagues, once crowded streets empty unnaturally, shops close, public gatherings cease, temples lose visitors. Survivors describe cities becoming acoustically hollow, filled only with isolated footsteps, distant cries, or funeral processions. In accounts of the plague of Athens and later epidemics across the ancient and medieval world, silence itself becomes evidence of societal collapse. A silent city feels almost impossible to human psychology. War produces similar effects. During sieges, urban sound changes dramatically. Ordinary commerce disappears. Night becomes tense and controlled. People lower voices instinctively. Guards listen from walls for movement beyond visibility. Entire populations strain to hear signs of attack in darkness. Sometimes the silence outside city walls becomes more frightening than battle itself. Ancient armies understand this well. Surprise attacks often rely on stealth and nighttime approach. Defenders listening from towers become hypersensitive to changes in environmental sound. A forest outside the walls falling strangely quiet may indicate soldiers moving into position. Dogs barking suddenly and then stopping can trigger panic across entire districts. The old hunter-gatherer instincts survive beneath urban life. Cities also develop ritualized sound specifically to oppose fear after dark. Temple bells, prayer calls, ceremonial music, drums, horns, and chants serve religious functions, but they also reassure populations psychologically. Sound declares continued human order against uncertainty. Some traditions explicitly connect noise with protection. Bells drive away spirits. Drums repel evil forces. Singing maintains courage through darkness. Festivals fill nighttime streets with fire and movement, partly because collective noise pushes back isolation. Silence belongs to wilderness and death. Sound belongs to the living city. This distinction becomes deeply symbolic. Even architecture participates. Narrow stone streets amplify footsteps and voices. Courtyards distribute household sounds across neighborhoods. Public fountains create constant water noise. Markets overflow acoustically during daylight and often continue partially into evening. Ancient cities are dense sensory environments compared to isolated rural life. And still, fear of silence never fully disappears. In fact, cities may sharpen awareness of it through contrast. A person accustomed to crowded streets notices unusual quiet immediately. Modern urban residents experience the same phenomenon during blackouts, curfews, disasters, or sudden snowfall. Familiar sound vanishes. The city feels exposed. Human beings suddenly remember how dependent they are on collective activity for emotional security. One especially revealing example comes from accounts of abandoned cities after collapse or conquest. Travelers entering ruined urban centers often describe overwhelming silence first. Wind moving through empty stone. Birds nesting inside temples. Grass growing across roads once crowded with thousands of people. The absence feels unnatural because the structures themselves still expect sound. Ancient ruins therefore become emotionally disturbing in ways similar to abandoned villages earlier in human history, only magnified enormously. Entire civilizations can vanish, leaving behind spaces designed for noise but occupied by silence. And silence inside human-built places carries unique psychological force. A forest is meant to be quiet sometimes. A dead city is not. Perhaps this helps explain why ghost stories so often attach themselves to abandoned settlements, ruins, castles, empty roads, and silent buildings. Human spaces without humans unsettle the mind deeply. They resemble the aftermath of disaster. The nervous system recognizes missing life immediately. Civilization tries to defeat ancient fear through walls, crowds, lights, and endless activity. But every city eventually discovers the same truth known beside prehistoric fires long before the first stone streets ever existed. Silence is patient, and when it finally enters human spaces, People still fear what may follow behind it. For some people, silence is not something to escape. It is something to enter deliberately. This may be the strangest turn in the ancient relationship with nighttime fear. After thousands of years spent avoiding silent places, guarding against them, and filling darkness with fire, noise, ritual, and community, certain individuals begin walking willingly into isolation. They climb mountains alone. They disappear into deserts. They seal themselves inside caves, monasteries, forests, and stone cells where human sound nearly vanishes. And many of them discover that silence changes the mind in ways both terrifying and profound. The earliest roots of this behavior likely stretch deep into prehistory. Shamans, ritual specialists, healers, or vision seekers in many traditional societies separate themselves temporarily from ordinary communal life. Fasting, darkness, solitude, and sensory deprivation appear repeatedly in spiritual practices across continents. Scholars still debate how universal these patterns truly are, but enough similarities exist to suggest something deeply human beneath them. Silence becomes a threshold. What begins as fear slowly transforms into a tool for confronting fear itself. In deserts especially, this transformation becomes dramatic. Ancient religious traditions across the Near East and North Africa repeatedly portray wilderness as a place of revelation. Prophets travel outward into barren, silent landscapes seeking divine contact. Hermits abandon cities entirely. Early monks build isolated communities far from ordinary civilization, where long stretches of silence structure daily life. Yet the accounts left behind are rarely peaceful in the modern sense. Many describe terror first. The deserts surrounding early Christian monastic settlements in Egypt become famous for visions, temptations, hallucinations, and psychological struggle. Monks living in near total isolation report hearing voices, sensing hostile presences, or confronting overwhelming dread during nighttime silence. Medieval writings often frame these experiences as spiritual warfare against demons, but modern readers can also recognize effects associated with sensory deprivation, isolation, fasting, exhaustion, and prolonged contemplation. The silence ancient people once feared collectively now becomes internal. No single explanation fully accounts for these experiences. Religious conviction, cultural expectation, neurological stress, and genuine altered states likely overlap in complex ways. What matters is that silence continues producing powerful emotional effects even among those seeking it intentionally. The same pattern appears in caves and mountains. Across Asia, Europe, and the Americas, spiritual seekers repeatedly retreat into silent underground chambers or remote highlands for meditation, ritual, or vision quests. Tibetan hermits isolate themselves in frozen mountain caves. Hindu ascetics meditate in forests and river valleys. Indigenous traditions across the Americas include solitary periods in remote landscapes intended to provoke spiritual insight or transformation. Again and again, silence is treated not as emptiness but as encounter. Something emerges there. Modern neuroscience provides intriguing insight into why these practices can feel so overwhelming. In ordinary life, the human brain constantly processes external stimulation. Conversation, movement, environmental sound, social interaction, and routine activity maintain cognitive structure. Extended silence and isolation remove many of these stabilizing inputs. Attention turns inward with increasing intensity. Thoughts grow louder, memories sharpen, fear expands easily. Many individuals entering prolonged silence therefore experience heightened emotional sensitivity, distorted time perception, vivid dreams, or sensations interpreted spiritually. Ancient practitioners often understand these experiences through the religious language available to them. The desert contains demons, the mountain holds gods, ancestors speak in caves, spirits test the solitary traveller. The evidence remains incomplete regarding how ancient individuals personally interpreted such experiences, because written descriptions often come centuries later or through heavily symbolic traditions. Still, one emotional pattern appears consistently. Silence strips away ordinary certainty. And that stripping away is dangerous. Not everyone survives it psychologically. Historical records from isolated monastic communities occasionally mention madness, despair, paranoia, or overwhelming temptation among individuals living in extreme solitude. Some hermits return to society quickly after encountering unbearable silence. Others remain isolated for decades and emerge transformed, revered, or deeply unstable. Ancient people recognize both possibilities clearly. Silence can purify, silence can destroy. This duality appears repeatedly in religious symbolism. Wilderness becomes both sacred and hostile. Caves become places of revelation and death. Mountains bring enlightenment and isolation simultaneously. The seeker enters silence, hoping to encounter truth, but may instead confront fear, memory, or the terrifying scale of existence itself. Nighttime intensifies everything. A solitary figure alone in a cave, monastery cell, or desert shelter after dark experiences conditions remarkably similar to those feared by prehistoric ancestors. Human sound disappears, environmental noise fades, darkness expands beyond visibility. The nervous system remains alert despite conscious attempts at calm. The ancient instincts awaken again. Modern experiments in isolated environments confirm how persistent these reactions remain. Individuals spending time alone in polar stations, underwater habitats, or sensory deprivation chambers often report heightened anxiety during periods of deep silence, especially at night. Even trained participants struggle with the psychological weight of stillness over time. Human beings are social animals shaped by noise, movement, and shared presence. Complete silence pulls against those instincts. Yet many spiritual traditions insist that something valuable lies beyond that discomfort. Perhaps this explains why sacred silence often feels different from ordinary quiet. In ritual settings, silence becomes structured and communal rather than accidental. Participants expect meaning inside it. Monastic traditions develop routines specifically to stabilize the mind within silence through prayer, chanting, meditation, labor, and shared discipline. Without structure, silence can become overwhelming. Ancient people understand this intuitively. The feared silence of wilderness is chaotic and uncertain. Sacred silence is controlled, intentional, and interpreted through belief. One threatens identity, the other promises transformation. Still, the boundary between them remains fragile. A monk alone in darkness may still fear unseen presence. A hermit in the desert still hears the wind stop moving. A solitary traveller in silent mountains still feels watched by something older than language. The prehistoric fear never fully disappears. It simply changes shape. And perhaps that is why silence remains so powerful throughout human history. It strips away distraction until people confront realities usually hidden beneath ordinary life mortality. Isolation, memory, uncertainty, and the unsettling awareness that human beings occupy only a tiny, fragile circle of understanding surrounded by immense darkness. The fire grows smaller and the voices fade. The night expands outward endlessly. And in the silence, people begin hearing themselves too clearly. the ancient fear never truly disappears. It survives quietly inside stories. Long after predators retreat from most human settlements and cities spread artificial light across the night, old anxieties continue moving through folklore, superstition, and inherited habit. Parents still warn children not to wander after dark. Rural communities still distrust certain roads, forests, lakes, and ruins after sunset. Entire cultures preserve rules about silence that no longer seem fully rational on the surface. Do not whistle at night. Do not answer voices from the dark. Do not look too long into silent woods. Do not walk near the cemetery alone after midnight. These warnings often sound symbolic or superstitious to modern ears, yet beneath them remains a much older emotional structure shaped across thousands of years of human vulnerability. The world after dark is uncertain. Silence means attention. Something may already be nearby. Folklore preserves this instinct with remarkable consistency across continents. In European traditions, forests remain places where travellers disappear quietly. Wolves, witches, spirits, and strange figures emerge along silent roads between villages. Fairy tales often begin with someone leaving the safety of communal light and entering dark woods where normal rules collapse. Scholars studying these stories frequently note how they encode practical fears alongside symbolic meaning: starvation, isolation, predation, kidnapping, and exposure. The supernatural elements grow from real human danger. In parts of East Asia, silence at night often carries associations with restless spirits or hidden forces observing the living. Japanese folklore, for example, contains countless stories involving eerie stillness before supernatural encounters. Certain spirits appear only in silent, abandoned places or during moments when ordinary environmental sound vanishes unnaturally. Again, silence becomes presence rather than absence. Across indigenous traditions in the Americas, Australia, Africa, and the Arctic, oral histories frequently describe landscapes where unusual quiet signals danger or sacred power. Some locations are avoided entirely during specific times. Certain sounds are forbidden after dark. Hunters interpret animal silence carefully, even where supernatural explanations differ greatly. Environmental awareness remains deeply woven into belief systems. The evidence remains incomplete regarding how directly modern folklore preserves prehistoric emotional memory. Stories evolve constantly across generations. Religious influence, political change, migration, and artistic invention reshape older traditions continuously. Yet the persistence of specific nighttime fears is striking. Human beings repeatedly imagine silence as meaningful. Many folk traditions also preserve fear surrounding abandoned places specifically. Empty houses, ruined villages, forgotten roads, and silent fields become natural settings for ghost stories almost everywhere. A structure built for human life but lacking human sound feels wrong instinctively. Modern horror still relies heavily on this ancient reaction. A silent hospital corridor, an abandoned town, a dark forest where insects suddenly stop, an empty building with no visible movement. These images remain effective because they activate old neurological expectations buried deep beneath modern rationality. Something should be alive here. Something should be making noise. Why has everything gone quiet? The human mind still responds exactly as ancient ancestors once did beside campfires. Rural traditions preserve some of the clearest echoes. In farming communities across Europe, Asia, and the Americas, people historically pay close attention to nighttime animal behavior. Dogs barking suddenly at empty darkness, birds becoming silent unexpectedly, livestock acting strangely before storms. Even where scientific understanding grows over time, emotional interpretation often remains older and more instinctive. Silence continues functioning as warning. Certain superstitions reveal this connection almost openly. Whistling at night is forbidden in many cultures because it supposedly attracts spirits or dangerous attention. Anthropologists suggest such rules may partly discourage unnecessary noise that could reveal human location after dark or disrupt communal vigilance. Similar explanations appear for prohibitions against shouting into forests, responding to unknown voices, or wandering away from fires and settlements. Practical survival knowledge and supernatural fear blend together naturally. No single explanation fully accounts for why these traditions endure so strongly even after original environmental dangers fade. Wolves disappear from much of Europe. Urban populations grow disconnected from wilderness. Artificial light reduces nighttime uncertainty. Yet emotional responses remain surprisingly persistent, partly because modern life never eliminates silence completely. Storms still cut electricity, snow still muffles entire landscapes, empty roads still produce unease after midnight. Deep forests remain psychologically unsettling to many people. Remote deserts, caves, and oceans still provoke fear difficult to explain logically. And abandoned places still disturb almost everyone. During the 20th and 21st centuries, wars, disasters, and evacuations create new experiences of silent human spaces on enormous scales. Survivors walking through bombed cities, abandoned industrial zones, or evacuated disaster regions repeatedly describe the silence as emotionally overwhelming. Photographs from places like Chernobyl disaster or deserted wartime streets unsettle viewers, partly because they depict environments built for noise but occupied only by stillness. The ancient reaction remains immediate. Civilization may suppress silence temporarily, but when silence returns to human spaces, it still feels like aftermath. Folklore adapts accordingly. Modern ghost stories move from forests and caves into hotels, schools, subway tunnels, office buildings, and apartment complexes. Yet the emotional structure barely changes. The fear still depends on interrupted human sound, uncertain presence, and spaces where ordinary life has vanished unexpectedly. Even technology reflects this inheritance. Many people sleep more comfortably with background noise from televisions, fans, music, or conversation. Total silence at night often produces discomfort rather than peace. Psychologists sometimes connect this preference to the brain's need for environmental reassurance. Ancient humans rarely experience complete silence safely. Continuous low-level sound signals ongoing life around the sleeper. The nervous system still expects company in darkness. Children demonstrate this instinct clearly. Fear of quiet bedrooms, dark hallways, and silent houses appears remarkably early across cultures. Adults often dismiss such fears as imagination, yet from an evolutionary perspective, they are understandable. A child alone in silence would once face enormous danger. The old fears begin young because they are old themselves. And despite everything modern civilization builds against darkness, silence still occasionally reaches people in ways impossible to ignore. A forest suddenly still during a nighttime walk, a city street emptied after disaster, snow falling thick enough to erase ordinary sound, a power outage removing electrical hum from an entire neighborhood. In those moments, modern life thins briefly. Beneath it waits something ancient, a memory older than language, older than cities, older than history itself. The memory of human beings gathered around small fires listening carefully to the darkness beyond the light, knowing that when the world became too quiet at night, Survival often depended on understanding why before it was too late. Even now, humanity has never fully escaped the night. Modern people often imagine themselves separated completely from ancient fear. Cities glow so brightly that stars disappear above them. Climate-controlled buildings isolate human beings from wilderness and weather. Predators survive mostly in documentaries, distant reserves, or fragmented landscapes far from daily life. Artificial sound fills nearly every hour. Engines hum continuously. Phones vibrate beside beds. Electricity surrounds the modern world with constant low-level reassurance. And yet silence still unsettles people almost immediately. The ancient instinct remains buried astonishingly close to the surface. When electrical systems fail during blackouts, entire cities change emotionally within minutes. Elevators stop humming, air conditioning disappears, traffic fades, screens go dark. People step outside instinctively, listening. Many report unease difficult to explain logically even when no immediate danger exists. The silence itself feels wrong because modern civilization rarely allows true quiet anymore. For a brief moment, the world resembles something older. Natural disasters reveal this especially clearly. Survivors of hurricanes, earthquakes, floods, and wildfires often describe eerie stillness before or after catastrophe as one of the most emotionally disturbing aspects of the experience. Entire neighborhoods lose their ordinary soundscape. No traffic, no conversation, no machinery. Only distant wind or isolated movement through debris. Civilization suddenly sounds fragile. During global crises, empty urban spaces affect people profoundly. Streets designed for millions feel uncanny when silent. Public squares without crowds seem almost posthuman. Modern observers repeatedly use words like haunted, unnatural, ghostly, or abandoned when describing unusually quiet cities. The emotional vocabulary has barely changed from antiquity. Something in the human mind still interprets silence as evidence that normal life has broken down. Psychologists studying fear responses note that uncertainty remains one of the most powerful triggers of anxiety. Noise provides information. Silence removes it. Even in safe environments, the brain continues scanning for explanation when expected sound disappears unexpectedly. Modern humans may intellectually understand there are no predators outside the apartment or spirits in the hallway, but the nervous system reacts faster than conscious reasoning. Ancient survival systems still operate beneath modern thought. This becomes especially obvious at night. A person alone in a quiet house may suddenly feel watched after hearing no sound at all for too long. Campers in wilderness areas often report heightened awareness when insects stop calling. Travelers driving isolated roads at night become uneasy when encountering abandoned gas stations, empty towns, or stretches of complete silence. The emotional logic remains prehistoric. Some researchers argue that modern humans rarely experience true natural silence anymore, because industrial civilization surrounds daily life with constant artificial sound. In extremely quiet environments, people sometimes become uncomfortable, surprisingly quickly. Anechoic chambers designed to absorb nearly all sound are famous for producing disorientation, anxiety, and heightened awareness of internal bodily noises. In deep silence, as people begin hearing their own breathing, heartbeat, joints moving, blood circulating, the body itself becomes strange. Ancient people likely experienced versions of this regularly in caves, deserts, winter landscapes, or solitary nighttime travel. Without modern scientific frameworks, such sensations could easily feel supernatural or spiritually significant. Yet even modern individuals often react emotionally to profound silence, despite understanding its physical causes. Knowledge changes interpretation, it does not erase instinct. The same applies to darkness. Artificial lighting reduces some ancient fears while preserving others beneath the surface. Cities glow brightly, but people still avoid certain places after dark instinctively. Empty alleys, silent stairwells, abandoned buildings, isolated parking lots, and quiet forests continue producing heightened vigilance. Human beings remain creatures shaped by nocturnal vulnerability. Interestingly, modern entertainment often recreates ancient fear intentionally. Horror films, ghost stories, suspense novels, and survival narratives rely heavily on interrupted sound and threatening silence. The audience knows intellectually they are safe, yet the nervous system responds automatically to familiar patterns. The forest becomes quiet. The hallway falls silent. The radio cuts out. The footsteps stop. Tension rises immediately because the brain recognizes ancient danger signals older than civilization itself. No single explanation fully accounts for why silence remains so psychologically powerful. Biology contributes. Cultural memory contributes. Personal experience contributes. Spiritual belief contributes. Human beings are shaped simultaneously by evolution, storytelling, environment, and imagination. Silence gathers all these layers together. It reminds people of mortality because the dead are silent. It reminds people of isolation because lonely places are quiet. It reminds people of vulnerability because predators approach silently. It reminds people of catastrophe because disasters often leave silence behind them. And perhaps most importantly, silence reminds human beings how little control they truly possess over the surrounding world. For most of history, survival depends on paying attention to subtle changes in the environment. Ancient people who ignored silence completely may simply not survive long enough to pass on their habits, fears, and memories. Over immense stretches of time, vigilance becomes emotional inheritance. Modern civilization softens this inheritance but cannot remove it entirely. There are still moments when the ancient world returns unexpectedly. A hiker stops moving because the forest suddenly grows still. A sailor watches the sea flatten beneath strange atmospheric calm. A parent wakes instantly because a sleeping child has become too quiet. A city loses power and millions listen uneasily into darkness. In those moments, people experience something remarkably close to what their distant ancestors once felt beside Paleolithic fires. The realization that silence is never truly empty. It is expectation. It is uncertainty. It is the old human instinct searching darkness for movement before the eyes can see it. And perhaps that is why silence at night continues haunting human imagination so deeply even now. Somewhere beneath modern language, technology, and civilization, the species still remembers countless generations spent surviving inside dangerous darkness where sound meant life. And sudden silence often meant something unseen had already entered the world nearby. The fire burns lower, the voices fade, the night stretches endlessly beyond the last circle of light, and human beings continue listening, exactly as they always have. The night eventually grows quiet enough that even fear itself begins to soften. Across deserts, forests, mountains, frozen plains, and sleeping cities, countless generations of human beings have listened into darkness trying to understand what silence means. Sometimes it meant predators waiting just beyond the firelight. Sometimes it meant storms gathering beyond the horizon, or enemies moving unseen through trees, or abandoned settlements slowly surrendering themselves to wind and dust. Sometimes silence belonged to grief, to memory, to gods, or to the dead. And sometimes it was only the world resting briefly between sounds. Yet human beings rarely experience it that way. For most of history, silence is never empty. It carries possibility, the absence of birds in a forest, the stillness before snow begins falling, the unnatural calm before floodwater rises, the hollow quiet inside abandoned ruins where thousands of lives once unfolded. Ancient people survive because they learn to hear these changes and fear them when necessary. That fear shapes entire civilizations. Fires are kept burning through the night, walls rise around cities, bells ring across darkness, stories pass between generations warning children about lonely roads, silent valleys, and unseen things waiting beyond familiar light. Religions grow around isolated deserts and caves where silence feels sacred enough to transform the mind itself. Even now, modern people still sleep beside low electric hums and distant traffic, surrounding themselves with reassuring noise without always understanding why. Somewhere deep inside the nervous system, the old memory remains. The memory of fragile human beings gathered together in darkness, listening carefully because survival depends on noticing when the world changes around them. Perhaps that is the strange truth hidden beneath this ancient fear. Silence frightens people not only because it hides danger, but because it reminds them how small they are. When sound disappears, human beings become aware again of the vastness surrounding them. The forests beyond the campfire, the oceans beyond the shore, the endless night sky above every civilization that has ever existed. And against that immense silence, human life has always sounded temporary. A few voices around a fire, a village beside a river, a city glowing briefly in the dark before centuries pass and its streets fall silent too. Time eventually quiets everything. Yet generation after generation, people continue pushing back against the darkness with stories, songs, rituals, conversation, and firelight. Not because silence can ever truly be defeated, but because human beings survive best together, making noise against the unknown. Far out beyond the last lights of any city, the ancient night still waits almost unchanged. The wind moves softly through trees, somewhere distant. An animal calls once and then stops. The darkness listens patiently, and so do we.